Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and honestly, today's archetype is going to be a really good one. If you like kind of high-paced combat, switching between stances, and high mobility, the Clawdancer is going to be for you. It is absolutely insane how fun this particular archetype looks to play. It's absolutely crazy, and it ties in to Tian Sha. It's actually developed by the catfolk of southern Tian Sha. So a good way to tie in some of Paizo's most recent books. I'm absolutely in love with this particular archetype. So hey, let's go ahead and get right into it, shall we? Let's go ahead and take a look at the dedication itself. So the Clawdancer dedication does require that you have a permanent unarmed claw or talon attack, such as granted to you by an ancestry or graft. Permanent as in, if you have like a form shift, I'm sure those also work. So a Kitsune, for instance, should be able to if they get any kind of claw attacks. But if you have anything that gives you claws, like a spell, that doesn't work, which this is actually the first of its kind that I've seen here on the channel, which is kind of cool. Now, when you pick up this dedication, you get two stances. You get the Claw stance and you get the Talon stance. The Claw stance is a D6 slashing that's in the Brawling group. It has the Agile, Finesse, and Grapple and Unarmed traits. It's also Versatile Piercing, which is insane. That's a lot of traits for a D6 weapon. So overall, it's pretty good. The Talon stance is also pretty good, though not quite as impactful, though it does do more damage. It has a D8 slashing damage, and it's in the Brawling group. It has the Finesse, Sweep, and Unarmed traits. You don't need a free hand to use the Talon, the Sweeping Talon strikes. So this is the first time we've gotten in any book where if you have a obvious like kick or non-arm based attack, that it states specifically that if you don't have a free hand, you can actually still use it. So it's nice to know that at least Paizo understands that that's kind of a question, and the fact that it's clarified here is really, really good. So this is an amazing dedication. Granted, it doesn't offer you much more than two stances that you'll have to spend an action to swap between, though this particular archetype does give you tons of ability not only to swap between the two, but also to get into them oftentimes as a reaction. So the Clawdancer dedication is really good if you're playing a monk or any other kind of high speed kind of classes. If you're playing a class that has high armor, that's going to get in the way of some of the benefits of this particular class. I would say Clawdancer specifically works best if you're either a fighter or a monk's, respectively. It's something that the strengths of this class are the weapons are actually pretty good, and you're pretty set as far as like what you need other than just, hand wraps and mighty blows as you level your character. The downside is if you get any cool magic gear, you're going to be kind of SOL because it's like, oh, well, I'm based around using my claws. If I find a magic weapon, I mean, you can still use the talons and a magic weapons, which can be kind of cool, and there's some ways to definitely work it, but this particular archetype really wants you to switch between both claw stance and talon stance. So honestly, this is the perfect archetype if you're using the free archetype rule, which I recommend everyone uses. But let's go ahead and look at some of the feats. First up, we have Claw Snag at level 4. Its trigger is an enemy attempts to escape while you have them currently grappled or restrained. That's also a big part of this particular archetype as well. Grappling is a somewhat of a big part, so you're definitely going to want to have a lot of athletics if you're going in this build, which shouldn't be a problem most of the time. But with the Claw Snag, you shift into your claw stance if you haven't been already, and then you make a frenzied claw strike against the triggering creature. Pretty good. It doesn't necessarily stop them from escaping, but if you got them grabbed, you can swap into your stance, and it's essentially an attack of opportunity on an escape check, which is kind of rare reactive strike on a escape check, which is rare because the escape is actually a attack action and not like a manipulate action. So Claw Snag is really good and gives you our first opportunity here to swap into our stance as long as we're grappling an enemy and they're trying to escape, which is a lot of a prerequisite, but still, I do find this one particularly good. And even if you're not using it to get into your claw stance, it's very good for just attacking an enemy who's obviously going to want to escape your grasp if you're spending your turns keeping them immobilized. Next up, we have Dashing Pounce. This is also a level 4 one, and honestly, one I'm a little bit mixed on. So you're either in your claw stance or your Talon stance. You leap, and if you end your movement next to an enemy, you can make 2 frenzied clawed unarmed strikes against it after applying your multi-attack penalty as normal. There's no like map squish in any of this, so anytime you're going to attack multiple times, you're going to be attacking at your whatever your current multi-attack penalty is. Now, if both of the strikes do miss, you fall prone. So this is an action squish. You get a leap and 2 attacks for 2 actions. Not bad. This is a really good initiating tool where you might not be able to get to an enemy with a single stride. So you stride as far as you need to, leap the remaining distance, and make 2 attacks against them. And since the claw stance specifically is agile, it's pretty likely that you're going to hit with at least one of the 2 strikes. Though with the fact that 1, both attacks apply your multi-attack penalty as normal, and 2, if you miss both, you fall prone at the end of your leap. This one is honestly a little bit of a risk. The chances of missing twice are not so insignificant that this is just not going to happen in your game. So at one point or another, depending on how often you use this, you're going to fall prone after missing twice, which is going to feel super bad. Though the action economy, the extra mobility this kind of adds in, is not too bad. So, buyers beware when it comes to Dashing Pounce. I think it's okay overall. I like the mobility aspects to it, and I'm not even too bothered by the applying your multi-attack penalty as normal. But it's the 2 strikes missing, causing you to fall prone, that kind of makes this action feel kind of bad, and I feel like there's other similar actions out there that just don't have this penalty, so regardless, it's interesting to say the least. Also here at level 4, we have Talon Sweep. This is actually my favorite reaction from the level 4s, as it gives you the opportunity. If you're being flanked by 2 enemies and one of them is striking you, as a reaction, you can swap into your Talon stance if you weren't already in it. And if the strike misses you, you can then make a spinning Talon strike against either or any creature that's currently flanking you. This is really good because 1, the swapping into your stance is not dependent on the enemy missing you or even you like succeeding on a strike. So you just get to, as a reaction, swap into your stance, which is pretty cool. And in addition, if the enemy does miss, at the very least, you can attack them. Or I guess at the very most, you can attack them. And if they hit you, you still got to go into your stance anyway. So if you're playing a class like Monk that doesn't have a lot of reactions, honestly, Talon Sweep is an insanely good pickup because this is just a free stance swap. And, depending on how the combat situation is, this can be super beneficial to how you're going, because with the Talon stance, you get sweep. So any attacks you make against, surrounding enemies allows you to apply a bonus. So overall, Talon Sweep is really, really good. At level 6, we get probably one of the best feats here in Clawdancer, which is Obsidian Shards. It's real simple. If your last action was a successful Frenzied Claw or Spinning Talon Strike, you can spend an action and break your claw off inside of the enemy. They take a d6 persistent bleed damage, and this increases as you get better weapon runes. It increases to 2d6 if your unarmed attacks deal 3 weapon dice, 3d6 if it deals 4 weapon dice. And it doesn't even say specifically from striking runes. So any kind of power attack or any kind of attack that can possibly give you extra damage dice actually can be used for Obsidian Shards as well, which is really, really cool. So overall, Super solid. As long as the enemy can bleed, there's really no reason not to pop this off because that's just a guaranteed extra damage. And especially if you're doing something like dashing pounce and you hit with one of those 2 strikes, then bam, Obsidian shard, and it's essentially like you did a 3rd attack altogether, granted minus the ability modifier to the damage. So I think this is an insanely good feat, and you should select this at level 6 because I can only see it being beneficial unless you're fighting a bunch of undead that are just immune to any kind of precision damage. But, it's very solid. Next up, a very interesting one, and one I actually really like. Wheeling grab requires that you're trained in acrobatics, and essentially it just replaces your tumble through action, and it allows you to shift into your claw stance. So if you're in Talon stance, you can use this action to both shift to claw stance and tumble through the enemy. And if you moved through an enemy space, which, I mean, you're tumbling, so why wouldn't you? I guess you'd have to succeed. You can grapple it too. So this is an action that can swap your stance and allow you to attempt to tumble through. And if you do so, you can then grapple that enemy. It says you can grapple it, which is very weird word, like verbiage here. It probably should say you can attempt a grapple against the enemy as like a free action or something, just to make it more clear what the intent is behind it. But regardless, wheeling grab is very, very good. It's very unfortunate that it's at the same level as Obsidian shard, because I honestly think this one is also just a very solid option a lot of the time. So yeah, wheeling grab is really good. Next up, we have hindquarter kick. Also here at level 6, we got a lot of early level feats, which is very cool with Clawdancer. Now, you have to be in your claw stance and have an enemy currently grabbed. Now, what you do is essentially you grab the enemy's defensive limbs, like their arms or whatever, and then you shift to your Talon stance and make 2 spinning Talon strikes against the grabbed enemy. You apply your multi-attack penalty as normal, and then you release the creature. So, for a singular action, you can shift to Talon stance and make 2 attacks. That's a 3 action squish compression into a single action. Insanely good. Now, obviously, I think Claw stance is more often than not better than Talon stance, though Talon stance does do more general damage. So that's always a choice you're going to have to make. But honestly, hindquarter kick, also insanely good. They're making level 6 a very difficult level for anyone who's trying to go through it because there's so many good options. I don't know. I mean, obviously I like Obsidian shard. I think that's going to be your first pick, but if for some reason that's not your choice, it's going to be a very hotly debated question which feat you should select here at level 6. They're all really, really good. Also at level 6, we get like kip up early, essentially. So spinning stand is 1 or 2 actions. You enter, if you're prone, you enter Talon stance if you weren't already in it, and then you strike an enemy and stand. Now, this strike to the enemy does not have the -2 circumstance penalty for attacking while prone, and standing from this does not trigger any reactions from any enemy, not just the one you're kicking. And you can make this a 2 action one to make 2 Talon strikes rather than just 1. Now, that's pretty good action compression, though I will say that if you're doing the 2 strike variant, they must be against separate targets, which honestly is probably not even going to be that unlikely. So yeah. Now, this is a weird one where it doesn't say you apply your multi-attack penalty as normal, but in lieu of the fact that it doesn't say you don't apply it or allude to such, we have to assume that this is going to apply map normally. So regardless, spinning stand is really good. It's essentially a kip up. Granted, kip up is a reaction, so different action costs, but more or less gets the same results. And technically, you can do an attack with this. So very solid action compression here, a very useful overall ability. And I will say, if you're using dashing pounce and you fell prone for whatever reason, you can stand up without getting hit by an enemy. So, if you take dashing pounce, spinning stand might be just a very solid one to kind of at least make up for goofing up so badly. So I do like this one a lot. Finally, we get to level 8 here with Terror Tendons. This is a 2-action one. You have to be in claw stance with 2 open hands, so you can't be wielding any kind of weapons or shields or anything like that. Now, for the 2 actions, you make 2 Frenzy Claws attacks against the same target, increasing map as normal. If both attacks hit, the target must make a fort save against your class DC or become enfeebled 2 for 1 round. If they crit fail, they become enfeebled 2 for a minute. So this one is pretty okay. The fact that if both attacks need to hit to really make this any kind of beneficial does make it not as appealing. Though enfeebled is a very powerful condition, and enfeebled 1 or 2 for 1 round is going to possibly save a lot of damage coming your way. But I don't know. I mean, it's good. It feels like a lot is hinging on just your general accuracy. Now, Claw Stance obviously being agile makes this the most likely to hit twice, which is good. But I feel like with many of the actions you have available in Clawdancer, this one in particular seems not as good for the action cost because there's no real compression here other than the fact that if you hit twice, an extra thing can happen if the enemy fails a check. So you have to hit twice, and then the enemy needs to fail against your class DC, which, often or not is going to be a 50-50 for the enemy. More if they have Fortitude as one of their high stats, less if it's one of their low stats. So Terror Tendons is okay, in my opinion. I feel like I would select one of the other really, really good level 6 feats before I select Terror Tendons. But, that's just my opinion. All right, at level 8 as well, and actually the last level 8 feat we have here, we have a uncommon feat. Now, this one requires that you're the cat, or well, it doesn't require. It has the access of catfolk ancestry. Now, access, if you're unaware, is mostly a Pathfinder Society thing. So the actual plays for Pathfinder Society that you can do at like your nearby game store, those things along. So you don't really need to worry about it unless your GM is a big stickler about this kind of thing. But I do like it, the fact that cat folks did invent this. So the fact that there's a cat folk specific one is really cool. And it's actually a pretty good one. It's a reaction you can use once per hour whenever you attempt a basic reflex saving throw, just not any reflex saving throw, but a basic one, which, the majority are, so that's not a big deal. And you have to be either in your claw stance or your talon stance. The biggest benefit is whatever the save is, or whatever type of save you're making, basic reflex save anyway, you get to roll twice, take the better of the two, which is really good. And if you were in claw stance or talon stance, you shift to the other one. So feline dance is really, really good. I love that it ties into the catfolk ancestry and again offers us another opportunity to swap stances easily without necessarily spending just an action doing nothing. So feline dance is very good in my opinion, and honestly, between it and Terror Tendons, probably the one I would prefer. Next up, we have Hunting Snag. Now, this one's very interesting. It's another reaction. There's so many reactions in this particular archetype. The trigger is a creature within your reach uses a move action or leaves a square during its move that, is within your reach. Now, this one actually doesn't require, that you're in your claw stance or talon stance, but you do need to make a claw or talon unarmed strike. So whatever innate one you have, if you're not in your stance, which is actually pretty good. If this is early in the combat, you might not have had the chance to get into your stance. So that actually is a very intelligent design, in my opinion. Regardless, what it does is when the enemy moves, you make a claw or talon strike. If you critically hit, you stop the movement. And if you hit and the enemy keeps moving, you can step into the square that they were in. Overall, not bad. It is not my favorite reaction, but this one has a different kind of trigger than many of the reactions we already have. So giving us another reaction option is pretty good. The fact that it doesn't need us to be in a stance is actually pretty good as long as we have a claw or talon attack available. And, being able to stop an enemy from moving away is potentially really, really good. I feel like the monk version of this kind of feat is better because you can just select it so much earlier, like level 4 or something like that. And this one's only added benefit is you can step into the square if you hit, but the creature kept moving. So if you're a monk, probably not a good choice. If you're a fighter, probably, I mean, this is just as good as reactive strike, honestly, in the sense that you can potentially stop a movement. So if you're a fighter, I guess this one actually has a lot more value. But as a monk, I would probably go with standstill, which you could select at level 4. So yeah. Also here at level 10, we have Springboard. This is a singular action, and its requirement was your previous action was a successful spinning Talon strike against an adjacent foe. So they do need to be adjacent to you, even if you have reach for whatever reason. Now, you leap. This leap does not trigger any reactions from the enemy that you had struck, which is pretty good. And if you land within melee range of or melee reach, I suppose, of an enemy, you can choose to make a spinning Talon strike against them. So a pretty good action compression here. This gives you the ability to disengage with an enemy potentially, or you could have killed an enemy, kicked off of them to leap towards another one to make a strike, which I think is also really, really cool. Nothing here says that the enemy needs to still be alive. All you needed to do was make a successful spinning Talon strike against an adjacent foe. So you can kill an enemy, leap to another one, and make another strike with a singular action, which is pretty good. So overall, Springboard is really good. And again, it increases the general mobility of this particular archetype, though this one does require that essentially you were in your Talon stance, even though that's not in any of the requirements here. So yeah, I think Springboard is pretty good, honestly. I think this one is exactly the epitome of what this class is about, or this archetype is about, which is striking, moving, action compression, and, you know, just being all over the battlefield. So yeah, if you haven't fallen in love with this particular archetype by this point, I would definitely, it might not be for you, but I would definitely reconsider. It's really good. All right, so we're on to the last few feats here, but before we get to that, as always, if you like this kind of content, please like. Pathfinder content is horribly not well represented in the algorithm, so whatever we can do to support Pathfinder 2e content, I'm all for it, like my videos or anyone else's. And as well, if you like my content specifically, subscribe so you're a little more likely to see what I got coming out. With Player Core 2 coming out in a month from now, more or less, at least for the early release stuff, this is definitely a channel you're going to want to keep an eye on, because I'm going to be covering all the changes coming in Player Core 2. But let's go ahead and get on to the level 12 feat. There's only one that we have here for the Clawdancer, which is Claw and Talon Flow. So this one is a singular action. You have to be in either your Claw stance or Talon stance. It'll make a lot of sense in a moment. You use the unarmed attack associated with whatever stance you are in, and then you swap to the other stance. Simple. So you can essentially swap stances and strike as a singular action. Now, this does have the flourish trait, which is something to keep in mind, but overall, pretty good. Honestly, what I like about this one in particular is you are in your Talon stance, which is your higher damage stance. You strike an enemy, and then you use the action to strike the enemy, and then you swap into your Claw stance, which has agile, so that you have a higher accuracy on your second and or third attack for the round. So there's really not anything bad about this one. And of course, you could swap to your Talon stance for whatever reason, maybe for some of the reactions that you have available. This one allows you to tune your combat situation, what kind of stance you're in, which I think is very, very powerful. So Claw and Talon Flow is really, really good, actually. At level 14, we actually get a very interesting feat that I think is pretty cool. When you critically strike with your Claw or Talon attack, you get a different crit specialization depending on which one. Your Claw becomes a knife group, which allows you to do a d6 persistent bleed damage on critical strike. And your Talon becomes an axe group, which allows you to, if you crit an enemy with your Talon, you can hit another enemy with your Talon using the weapon damage result, not doubling for critical. So yeah, This is pretty good. Honestly, there's no reason not to select precise hooks because you're always likely to do some kind of crit throughout your campaign, especially after level 14. And the unarmed brawling one is okay, but it's being slowed based on a save versus your class DC. I would much rather go with the knife and axe group crit specializations for the unarmed strikes here. So precise hooks, if you have the room for it and you're at level 14, I recommend picking up as soon as you can. Oh, actually, I did miss something here. I was about to move on and then I read the last line. This is in addition to what your normal crit specialization effect is. So you get the brawling crit specialization in addition to your claw and talon. And if you have your brawling changed for whatever reason, then these are just on top of whatever that change is. So precise hooks is actually even better than I thought. So yeah, a really, really good feat. All right, and we're up to the final feat here. Not as long of a video, which I'm super happy about. But we have Storm of Claws. Now, this is 3 actions, and you need to be either in your claw or talon stance. I am not super big on this one, but anyway, what it does is you make 3 strikes applying your map as normal. After each strike hits and deals damage, you can step. Now, it says after each attack that hits and deals damage, you can step. So if it doesn't deal damage, technically, you don't get to step. Not very likely to happen, but something to keep in mind. But the thing is, the only benefit that you get from this one is possibly creating space between you and your enemy after one of your strikes. But I feel like, especially because the most opportune time to do that would be to step away after your 3rd strike, but you can only do so after it hits and deals damage. So there's no real action compression here because either one, I mean, I guess it allows you to move around the enemy potentially. So, potentially good, but you're not likely to make your 3rd strike, especially at level 16. And you can't really make good distance between yourself and enemies at level 16 because many of the enemies that you're facing are large or larger and have massive reach. So the likelihood that you're able to outreach them or get out of their reach is very, very small. So Storm of Claws is not good in my opinion. It feels like there are better actions for like action compression, adding better mobility overall. And what would have made this one good in my eyes is if one, you didn't apply map, which would be pretty cool, but more likely balance wise, you can make 3 strikes swapping between your stances as you see fit, because then you could do your talon strike, maybe even 2 talon strikes, and then swap into your claw for the final one to at least have a slightly better chance of hitting a 3rd time. That would have made this one a lot better in my eyes, but for all intents and purposes, I don't like Storm of Claws. I feel like there are a lot other better feats in this archetype than Storm of Claws. But maybe I'm wrong. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I think the Clawdancer is an insanely good archetype. It does everything that you want for a high action, like damage based archetype. I mean, everything here is combat based. It allows you to have unparalleled amounts of movement, tons of reactions, tons of action compression, lots of really cool imagery, and it gives you some really solid weapons that you get to use. If you are like a changeling that gets like the hag claws, for instance, this is a really good opportunity to make good use of those. Cat folk also, this ties into cat folk culture from Southern Tianxia, so this can be a backstory thing for your character. There's so much good like energy in this particular archetype that honestly, this is an A tier, probably an S tier archetype in my opinion. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. I'll see y'all next time. Bye.